Good evening, everybody. We we are gonna have Dr. Sudhir Vinamala with in a minute. Hi, good evening. Hi, sir.
Hi, hi, Charan. I made it.
Yes, you made it.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. I can. Sir, am I clear, sir?
Your voice is breaking up. Can I just? Okay. Is that okay now?
Yeah. Sir, am I audible to you? Is my voice still breaking?
It is, Charan. I don't know if it's because of my connection. Can Hello,
Now,
Charan. I can't hear you.
sir, is it better now?
Hello.
Sir, better. Hello.
Yes,
Hi,
that's
sir.
better. Yeah,
Better.
this is better.
Yeah. It's raining really bad, sir, in my area. So maybe that's the reason. Sir, it's a regular format. Do you want to introduce yourself, sir, to my viewers?
Yes. Hi, I am Dr. Sudhir. I am a consultant gastroenterologist. I work very closely with Dr. Charan. He sorts out most of my patients' issues. And I have to give you a little bit of an introduction. He introduced me to Instagram. I got enrolled 4 days ago, and he taught me a little bit of IT. And we decided that we would actually share our expertise and how we manage between us patients so that it's out there for the benefit of most of you who are unable to make it to us in these difficult times. And more importantly, because of this being COVID pandemic, I think most of you might even have some questions and answers. And as you may well already know, Charan is the expert who's done several of these programs before. And it's my absolute pleasure to be with him today. And
No,
without
sir, it's my pleasure.
I'll let him
My
kick off
pleasure.
with
You
that.
said yes immediately.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Sir, because you mentioned about COVID pandemic, before we get into the gut brain connection, a lot of people have been directly messaging me about what are the GI manifestations of COVID infection? I mean, are they just in the books or are you actually seeing patients who are coming with GI manifestations?
Okay, so that's a good question. First and foremost, I just want to wish all your followers or friends and family just to stay safe. That's the most important thing. Prevention is better than any form of cure. Now, if you do get COVID, it usually passes through a phase. So, if you start off from your nose, it is described that some people will lose their sense of smell or their flavor in the first few days of the illness. Now, followed by some others may develop episodes of diarrhea, which is loose stool, more like a gastroenteritis type symptoms. And in some others, where you are able to have access to blood tests, you can see some derangement in their liver function and other blood tests that are related to GI tract. But most commonly, it's important to understand that the disease is mild and mildly symptomatic or even asymptomatic. So 99% of the times, the symptoms that we see are mild symptoms. So they may have 1 or 2 days of fever, feeling unwell, and then the fever subsides and you get better. Now, unfortunately, with the social media, which we are also using now, and the reporting in the wider print as well as digital media, you get to hear the worst of the stories.
Yeah.
And in a way, it is good to educate everybody, but it has created a certain sense of panic and paranoia. So it's, instead of people helping each other out, we are more in terms of warning them as patients and avoiding them.
Yeah.
So the best thing I would do is stay safe, use the precautions, maintain your social distancing, and if you do get to have any of these symptoms such as fever, sore throat, cough, gastroenteritis type symptoms, please come and see a doctor. And then we can take it from there in terms of checking your symptoms, sending off a swab, trying to follow you up. That is the best way to do it. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. So, after I announced this topic, a lot of medical friends of mine are very curious about. So, what is the connection between gut and the brain? We know
That's in the brain.
neurology, health, and psychiatry is like a big connection. Even
Yes.
gynecology, psychiatry has a big connection. But what does gastro and psychiatry have to do? Which is a very upcoming field right now, which a lot of people don't know.
Yes.
So, do you want to talk about connection? How are they connected?
Okay. So when I was training, we divide our field of gastroenterology into several subspecialties. So we call it IBD, which is gut, solid organ, which is liver, and so on and so forth. So neurogastroenterology is an upcoming branch, as you rightly said. It involves two things: the structure and function. So structure is to do with the nerves. Function is what function they do or how we perceive it. So just to give you an example, we have to understand that the most of us know about brain and spinal cord, which is what we call as nervous system. But actually, there are about 500 million neurons in the gut, which is more than what you actually have in the spinal cord. And we call that as enteric nervous system. And what you see outside is the central nervous system or the peripheral nervous system. So there is constant dynamics going on from what happens in the gut to what happens in the brain. So think about it as an active interface. Okay. So if there is a problem with one, it influences the other. It is easy to show that. And sometimes these influences are productive. For example, you take an instance of a child going and doing an exam. They do feel very tensed, and we call it as productive tension. But the same one, when it becomes unproductive, people get lots of symptoms such as diarrhea, pain, sometimes feeling butterflies, sometimes feeling nauseous. So these symptoms get manifest. So it is easy to understand the relationship between the two. That is the first thing. Now, you probably already know, or most of your listeners would already know, that the nerves work by neurotransmitters, which means there are signals which start at one place and spread to others. And there are other substances called hormones, which are chemical mediators. So the gut is the source of a lot of chemical as well as neurotransmitters, which means that there is a dynamic interface constantly happening. And so it is this complex interface that happens. You start off from simple things such as peristalsis. So what happens when you eat? You eat food unconsciously. We are constantly swallowing. Food goes down your gullet into the stomach. It gets digested, and once a day or twice a day, you open your bowels. Okay. There is a complex mechanism behind it that this happens subconsciously. You don't necessarily want to know that this is happening, but it happens to all of us. And when there is a change in your psyche, which is in the thinking process, there are two fundamental things that happen. Either the normal physiological processes become exaggerated, i.e., the normal peristalsis, which is the movement of the food, can sometimes be perceived as pain, or becomes increased, which is increased bowel movements, or becomes decreased, which is constipation. So you have a symptom which is then correlated to what is happening elsewhere in your body. And that is one of the easiest ways to say it. So for example, sense of smell that we talked about in COVID, or some people say, my gut feeling tells me that there is something wrong. So it is them understanding what happens in the brain and trying to describe a symptom, which is called as an abstract symptom. They're not able to say it in words, but they know that there is something happening. And same thing happens to all of us. At the end of the day, we are human beings. We feel things. That's what makes us human.
Yeah.
So that interaction will always be there. Now, where this interaction becomes relevant is when one part of the body starts to control the other in a conscious or an unconscious way. So there are good things that happen, which is productive tension, as I said to you. The unproductive things, like for example, after an infection, some people will continue to have pain, some people will have diarrhea. So until such time, especially if you have patients who are anxious, who have anxiety, and these symptoms become exaggerated. So that is how you can easily correlate that there is a complex interaction between the unconscious normalcy that most of us go through to the conscious interaction between brain, spinal cord, the enteric nervous system, and through these chemical mediators. It is not necessarily a bad thing, but it is something to be aware of, and that will always help us deal with these things better. Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, that's the reason why a lot of people with generalized anxiety disorder or other anxiety disorders, they come with nausea, increased frequency of bowel, using the bathroom quite a bit. A lot of people who have performance anxiety, or if they have any particular stimuli, for example, stage fear, before that they'll have to go to the washroom to evacuate the bowels. It's so relevant that I see GI and psychiatry are so relevant. Also, sir, I was wondering about a lot of research being done on microbes. First of all, a lot of people don't know. People think bacteria are bad, so a lot of people don't know that there's something called microbes in our stomach. So, you want to tell like a little bit about that? So, what are these microbes? What do they do?
So, just to give you some data behind it, there are about 10 power 14 bacteria or microbes inside our gut. Okay, that is 10 times more than the cells available in the gut, and that is 100 times more than the genetic content that we have as a human body. So you can imagine how many bacteria are there inside the gut. And so all these bacteria, so when we are born, it is assumed, we don't know it for sure, but we think, this is the theory behind it, that very soon after our birth we get colonized with the bacteria that determines a lot of our immunity. So the interaction between, all those microbes that are inside the gut are called microbiota. There are thousands of species.
So I think you're freezing.
Can you, Sharon, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. I think you froze for a bit.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So, sorry, I got a phone call. So I declined it.
Yeah.
So it is this interaction between the bacteria that are there inside the gut and the host, which is us, immune system, creates certain specifics for us. And whenever this interaction is changed, so if you imagine, we were predominantly hunter-gatherers. So either we hunted up till about our history, we are not designed to drink Coca-Cola because it's an artificially manufactured one, or a fizzy drink. The reason why I'm giving specific century or 2 centuries ago, we did not even have antibiotics. So it was this complex interaction between the host and the genome, the bacterium, the microbiota, that was causing the issue of how we develop our immunity, how we behave, or how we respond to these specific stimuli. So to give you another example, normally we have acid in the stomach. When we use medication to reduce the acid and you drink contaminated water, you will become more susceptible to typhoid. But if you have normal acid, the normal physiological state of your body, and even if you take something contaminated, the acid in the stomach kills it. So each of our own body status has specific function, and this is designed and evolved over centuries. And so has the interaction between the microbiome and the body. So if you imagine that we have close to 10 power 14 bacteria inside us, so and nearly 60 tons of food actually gets digested over a lifetime in the GI tract for most of us. So you can imagine the interaction that goes through in anyone's lifetime. So at this point in time, right now, my own microbiota are also constantly building up my defense. And so any change in it is perceived to be causing some disease. But what we don't yet know is the causal and the effect, whether it's the disease that causes the change in the microbiota or the change in the microbiota that causes the disease. So one of my favorite pieces of research was to actually look at volatile organic compounds that get released. So these are substances that are in the urine or in the blood because of the interaction with the microbiota on the host in certain disease states. So what we did is that we collected stool and urine samples from our volunteers and we tested them. We gave them probiotics. Probiotics are nothing but um, a large quantity of microbes which we can take either a capsule, which are freeze dried, when taken in large quantities, are shown to have some good effect, okay, or therapeutic effect. So by you doing that, we are trying to change what is inside the gut. So that is how our understanding is growing. But this is a very fascinating field because we don't yet know what are the actual organisms that define a particular disease state. All we know is that at this point in time, from this disease state, this organism seems to be in predominance, and we are trying to work our way backwards. So hopefully, when we have enough of these, the microbial banks, if we call it, and interaction and the knowledge of it, we will be in a better position to tell almost everyone that this is your microbiota, like how we do our genome. This is susceptible to. So will be the case. This is your microbiota. These are the conditions that you may be susceptible to. So that is about the simplest way of saying that yes, there is microbiome, how it interacts with the host, what is the evolution, how things are changing on a day-to-day basis, whether can we in future be in a position to identify disease states by identifying the microbiota inside.
Right.
I know it's a lot, we've talked a lot about it, but that's in brief.
Yeah, no, but a lot of people don't understand that about the microbiota and the or good bacteria in a very simple way in our stomach. So you spoke about probiotics, which is nothing but this good bacteria. Other than taking the freeze-dried form in the tablets, is there any natural way of getting this good bacteria to your gut to produce immunity? What kind of foods?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Charan. See, what normally happens is that when we eat our food rich in dietary fiber, okay, now we don't always have the ability to digest them. So these fibers sometimes get partially digested and go into your large bowel. Now, certain of these dietary fibers, certain dietary substances promote development of specific bacteria more than others. So they are called prebiotics. So that group of substances are called prebiotics. So when we take prebiotics and you use along with probiotics, which is the freeze-dried bacteria we're talking about, which are the good bacteria, you then provide them with conditions that are favorable to develop more of these microbes. Now, I have to be a little bit cautious at this stage because almost all the studies we've done, you can imagine that we are still in the infancy of understanding this complex interaction. So we don't yet know what is the perfect formula for good bacteria. So most of the probiotics that we get in the market are actually up to 10 billion or 15 billion bacteria. But the concentrations that are used in studies that are required to make and change in your gut bacterial composition is about 10 times that dose. So quite a lot more. So we are not there yet in terms of understanding what is the right bacteria. But what we do know is that when you are eating food with the right composition, such as dividing your food broadly into 30% carbohydrate, 30% protein, maybe 10 to 20% of fiber, 10% of fat. That is broadly what we say. Now there are there's a lot of information. We can to some extent increase the fiber content of the food, which will also promote the establishment of good bacteria when taken along with these probiotics. So that is why prebiotics, which is the diet, probiotics, which is the bacteria, and leads to symbiotics, which is the right combination. And hopefully once with the symbiosis, you have the host genome interaction. We call that the gut microbiome. So that is how it works.
Sir, I mean, I don't. Yeah, so, sorry. Did I
carry
break
on.
you? Sorry.
Carry on.
To continue to that, I'm asking about curds. A lot of people mention about eating curd is good because it gives a lot of bacteria to your stomach. Is that true, or is just a myth?
Now, it is to some certain extent. I've got some professors. My ex professor used to claim it. So when I was in UK, he actually um, shipped some curd, buttermilk, over to States and started manufacturing his own curd. And whenever a patient with irritable bowel came, he used to say, "You take this, you make this," and he actually had a recipe of it. So there is some truth to it. Now you should also see the commercially available foods. Most of them are fermented curd, fermented milk, which is curd, and these additional bacteria are added to keep it preserved in that. So it's
Right.
actually used as a medium to, this is what I said. It is the prebiotics along with the right bacteria, the right environment that will help favor the growth. So even if the curd itself didn't contain the bacteria, it may promote flourishing of the right type of good bacteria.
Right.
So that's how
Right.
it works.
Yeah. So, there is a lot of over-representation of IBS. A lot of patients will come to me with anxiety. Sometimes they obviously have like diarrhea. Sometimes they have constipation. They say that I have IBS. I have IBS. Like, do you want to tell us what is exactly irritable bowel syndrome?
Okay, that's a session by itself, but I'll try and brief.
Yeah.
Right. Now, the way I tell my patients is that um, irritable bowel syndrome is nothing but sensitive gut. That's the easiest way to understand it. Okay.
Yeah.
And that sensitiveness can happen anywhere from your upper part of the gut, which is stomach and esophagus, to your large bowel, which is the colon. Okay. Depending on that, you will have different symptoms. So it's important to first understand that in patients who have anxiety or depression, they tend to have a very sensitive gut, or their symptoms tend to be exaggerated. So say for example, you look at the criteria, we use what we call as Rome criteria. So you identify them, they tend to have symptoms for more than 3 days a week in the last 3 months, which is persistent, and you're not able to identify an organic cause leading to their symptoms. That is predominantly what we call as an IBS. But it has several shapes and forms. Say, if we talk about gullet, which is the throat and the esophagus, you can have normal levels of acid coming back up as a reflex. Because the esophagus is sensitive, they perceive it as pain. So they get chest pain, which is called non-cardiac chest pain. You can have inflammation or excess normal acid in the stomach, which most people will complain continuously of pain despite giving medication. That is called non-ulcer dyspepsia, which means that they are behaving like somebody who has an ulcer disease in the stomach, but they don't actually have an ulcer. It's just that the gut is very sensitive.
Yeah.
And you take the large bowel, it can be of 3 predominant types. One is excess stool, which is diarrhea, or less frequent stool, which is constipation, or mixed, alternating between the two.
Yeah.
And it also includes other symptoms such as bloating, feeling constantly full all the time, or pain. Now, that is, you can understand that when we don't have a structural cause or a physical cause to identify and explain why these symptoms are happening, then you label that under this broad category of IBS, which is the irritable bowel. So what I tend to tell my patients is that this is inconvenient, this is annoying for the person who has it, but it will not progress to anything sinister. And this is related to how stressful you feel, whether it's anxiety, depression, whether it is normal physiological state. People might be going through bereavements or recovering from an infection. All forms of stress can exaggerate these symptoms. And it is understanding the relationship between the two, that, okay, this particular stress is causing it. It is not really the stress. I mean, stress is unavoidable. All of us will have
Yeah.
certain amount of stress. It's
Of
how you
course.
respond to it matters. So what I tell my patients is, either you take the stress out or you learn to cope with better, and your symptoms will disappear.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
for most people, I think it works. It is understanding that in all these IBS or any other condition, reassurance is the first step. If the patient comes to understanding that there is nothing actually sinister or really wrong going inside, then that is their first step towards their progress, towards their healing. And that is how I do it. And coming back to your first question, which you asked me, you remember what is the connection between the gut and the enteric system, the nervous system?
Yes.
Now,
Yes.
if you apply that connection between the two, I mean, I'm sure you are an expert yourself. You do CBT, the cognitive behavioral therapy sessions.
Yes.
So in addition to all the medication I give you, I give my patients, your role in actually teaching them how to cope up with those symptoms actually helps more. That is one of the best evidence-based evidence out there. The second one, patients who are depressed or anxious, we use antidepressants and anti-anxiety medication. And it is actually used in much smaller doses, a tenth of dose, to reduce the sensitivity of these nerves. And that is how it actually helps them. So that is why I say IBS, yes, it is a syndrome. Yes, it's a constant annoyance for the people who have it. It can manifest in several symptoms, depending upon which part of the body gets affected. And you have to tailor your treatment according to that, in addition to support from Dr. Sharon, to be able to make them understand that relationship between the two and cope with these symptoms better. And most often, actually, if you say, for example, it's an acute stress state, like, for example, bereavement, exams, and as soon as that stressful period goes away, it gets better. And that is why IBS can sometimes be difficult for some patients. In fact, it's debilitating for some. For most people, we can actually manage it with minor medications, counseling, helping them give the reassurance. These sort of things will help.
Right. So I think we discussed pretty much a lot of important questions. I have some questions related, some unrelated that I got on my text. Okay. One is, everybody's asking about Corona, sir. Nobody's asking about anything else.
Okay, what do you want to know about
Corona?
Corona?
Asking like, no, they were asking does ordering food from outside, does it make you prone to get COVID-19?
Okay. Now, I need to take you back to the article that came, which is one of the, I think it was newspaper article where they did some contact tracing and identified it to be a delivery guy who was the super spreader for a group of people. Now, it's important to understand that it is not the food that causes it, it's the fomite-related transmission. So, coronavirus cannot survive on surfaces for long. So, for example, in the longest it can survive on cardboard is 4 days. On others, such as metal and everything, it's less than 24 hours. So, and if you heat it to right temperature, the food, even on the surface, it goes away. Most of us now are using sterilium, which is more than 68% alcohol with a combination of antiseptics. It goes away. It kills the virus. So, if you are using all these precautions and you are able to order your food, make sure it's hot when you eat it, the risk of getting transmission from it is very less. Okay. Now, it is not the food that matters, it's the fomite-related transmission. That is why we have to be careful as to where it's coming from and who is delivering it. So use the universal precautions, but don't be paranoid about taking any takeaways or deliveries, as long as you are following the precautions. Okay. Now, yes, I know it didn't help a lot of people when the newspaper article came out and said it was transmitted from the delivery boy who was delivering to a group of people in a flat, and all of them turned positive. But that is rarer than the rule. It's mainly about other fomites.
Right.
That's
so
the
someone
answer.
is asking. Yeah. So that question is answered. In the same question in a slightly different form, what if it's not the delivery guy? What if it is a food handler who has like the infection?
Heat it up.
And probably he's like sneezed or coughed into your food. Heat it up. Yes.
Yeah. Heat it. Don't eat any cold food. Just warm it up in a microwave or in a pan. Make sure it goes to 60-70 degrees. Then cool it down and eat. There is no evidence that it transmits through food. No. Especially when you are following proper hygiene, it doesn't. No.
Yeah. So I think last question, how to have good gastrointestinal health? Like, what are the do's and don'ts to have good
Do's and don'ts. Okay.
do's and don'ts?
Okay. So the best way to understand is diet, exercise are the two most important things. Okay. So in diet, I would say eat a healthy, well-balanced diet. Say you are a vegetarian, you are non-vegetarian, it doesn't matter, but choose a well-balanced and a complete diet. And as long as you are able to accommodate the rule which I told you earlier, so 30% carbohydrate, 30% protein, 10 to 20% fiber, and 10% fat, more than likely you are eating a balanced diet. But use the combination of fruits and vegetables, 2 to 3 liters of fluids every day, and where necessary, use the natural occurring forms of pre or probiotics that you are available, which is the curd, those sort of things we're talking about. You don't need to go and buy over the counter and start taking supplements. Okay, that's not what I'm recommending.
Yeah.
So it's having naturally occurring foods is the best way. Now, if you move a step forward, most of our foods that we are using are refined, stored with preservatives. So any excessively refined food is, again, be careful, and I would warn against it. But you do need packaging to transfer it from place to other. There are industrial revolution has created some opportunities and new foods that are coming, such as fizzy drinks. These were not naturally occurring foods, so those things try and avoid. Now it comes to habits. So alcohol, smoking, I would stay away from them.
Yeah.
Okay. And the other area is exercise. Most of us, we recommend 10,000 steps or equivalent a day. So it's a combination of healthy eating, healthy habits, and right exercise is what you need for a good gut GI tract. So it's not any magic trick to say that one food is better than the other. It's the balance and proportion along with expenditure. If you look at US, the current epidemic is not of a heart disease or a cancer. The current epidemic is obesity. It is having excess. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and obesity is we are starting to realize that it's actually a state where you're eating excessively. And now we are realizing that there is a complex interaction between gut microbiome, the psyche of the patient, and the hormones that are interacting between the two. So in a few years to come, we might be talking about it like you take this pill of microbiome with this bacteria going up, you will lose weight. Or we might say this particular bacteria in your gut is higher, that is why you are overweight. So you never know. Okay, that is to come. Yeah. So we've done some work on it. And we've noticed a relationship between the two. I know we're digressing from the question, but the right answer to your question will be balance and proportion. Whatever you eat, spend it the same day. And that is what is needed. Now, underweight is just as bad as overweight. And you would have seen a lot more people being undernourished and underweight who, for the false sense of perception, may equally do harm as it is excess is harmful in terms of obesity. So that.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I lost you for a second. Somebody is asking, how does deterioration of mental health have effect on physical health?
It is precisely that interaction that we talked about, the first question and the most relevant question that you asked me at the beginning of this session, where we touched more upon how the gut interacts with the brain. Now, the converse is also true. So how the brain interacts with the body, or so if the mind is delivering the wrong signals to the body, then you will have more symptoms, or you will have excessive symptoms, or perceive normalcy, which is the contractions I'm talking about, as pain. So it works both ways. So anyone, for example, who is anxious, they have difficulty getting to bed and sleeping. That causes you to be more awake for most nights and causes irregularity of your sleep pattern, irregularity of your meal times. And we know that we need certain amount of rest in every day for all of us to be able to have acid during So it can cause reflux. It can cause acid-related symptoms. The other conditions are you're anxious, you have just recovered from an infection, you can have increased bowel movements. Okay, so it works in different people in different ways, and that is why that interaction is always as a cycle. You have to break that cycle somewhere. Symptoms cause anxiety, anxiety makes the symptoms worse. So yes, it does affect.
So I think you froze for a second there.
Your picture is frozen.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I think you froze for a second, and now, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we'll take one last question and then we'll end the live. Relation between anxiety and ulcers, stomach ulcers, or even oral ulcers.
Okay. So I get asked this question a lot. If I am anxious, I feel that my symptoms are worse. Now, it's important to understand the pathology of ulcers. Ulcer disease is considered for the vast majority because either you're having certain habits such as smoking, alcohol, taking fizzy drinks, and certain types of food that you take. Number two, because of a bacterial infection from a bacterium called Helicobacter pylori. Or three, medications such as painkillers, such as NSAIDs that you take, or steroids, those sort of conditions, you get ulcers. Or if your body is going through stress, for example, recovering from a surgery, these sort of things. So where anxiety plays a role is how it affects sleep, how it affects you to cope with these symptoms, and how it affects you in terms of if you have predisposing conditions. Say, for example, you are going through a surgery and you're anxious about the effects of the surgery, and you already have Helicobacter, that itself is a risk factor independent of the anxiety, but it makes the symptoms worse. Because, so symptomatically you will feel worse, but that anxiety by itself does not cause the ulcer. So the symptoms of an ulcer disease can be seen in those who are anxious. So that's how it works. But the cause of ulcers is variable. There are several reasons why you develop those ulcers, but you perceive the symptoms much worse if you're anxious.
Right. All right, sir. I think we will end the talk with that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, Charan. Yeah, thank you.
We did it, sir.
I successfully froze about 5 times in between because of the phone calls coming from the hospital. I have to get back to all those phone calls.
No, I was scared that you'll get an emergency call and you would have to go, but that didn't happen. I'm glad.
Yeah. Thank you. I'll speak to them and I'll sort it out. But it's been a pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm sure your followers will have a lot more questions, and perhaps if they email to you at some point, you'll just collate an answer and write to them. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Sure, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Same.
Good night, sir. Bye. See you.
Bye-bye.